So today is just resuming some of the admin setup foundational items that we need to go over, primarily on the project side of the house, because we're going to be working on the PPM implementation most of all. A couple of these kind of transition over to tickets as well. The first one we're going to want to look at it and talk through is accounts departments. So in the left navigation, under your college name, there's organization settings. Let's click on organization settings and then accounts departments. So accounts departments are leveraged throughout the tool. Number one, they are a mandatory field on every project request or project, as well as every ticket. So at a minimum, we have to build the account department list here so that the account that the project is being requested for or the ticket is being requested for is gathered on that ticket or that project. Number two, the way that accounts departments are leveraged is that they can be set as a default on all of your user records. So one of the things from a people import perspective that you would need built first before you were to do a mass import, if you wanted a default account department on user records, is to indeed build out this account department list. So what are accounts departments? And the reason that we have the word accounts in here, in the higher education space, it's pretty much departments. But our tool was designed about, almost 20 years ago. And when we first year or two into it, we were public, private, any industry. And so accounts were kind of the private listing of departments. And then departments were more public. And so we kept both of them together. So what do accounts departments look like? They can look like simply information technology, facilities, marketing, academic services, so on and so forth. So the easiest way to, let's just create a couple manually here right now. And then as part of your homework, we'll talk about building out this from an import perspective. Simply, James, let's go up to the green plus new button, the complete name. So let's just put in information technology. You can have parent departments. So underneath information technology, maybe that's the parent, and then sub departments underneath that might be like network services, engineering, help desk, so on and so forth. If you wanted to get that granular, you have to have parents. So the information technology would have to be created first, and then you would, the next department, if it were like help desk, the parent could be information technology. Right, gotcha. Okay. Let's see how this hierarchical structure can work manually. Let's go down. Doesn't need a code, doesn't need a parent right now. The manager here could again be somebody maybe like Jeff, or oftentimes it's the CIO that's listed as the manager. That person has to be created as a user already. So if it's Jeff, then we're already set. If it's somebody else that's not in yet, you'd have to create them first and then populate them here. Let's go ahead and save this here. And then let's go ahead and X out of this small screen. And let's go back to do a plus new button. And let's name this one, now you might name it application services. Was that one of them?
Yes.
And the parent is now available to be selected. And the only one we have to select that from is information technology. And again, you can put in the manager there and you can come back and do that later. And then go ahead and save, and then X out of this window. And then let's do 2 or 3 more of those other 2 or 3 that you mentioned.
So we're under enterprise services, and
Perfect.
James is the manager of that.
Let's back out of organization settings in the upper left. Let's go down to users and roles. So one of the best ways to think about, okay, what are the accounts departments? If we go into the users here and we see the current users you guys have, we have 18 of you. So for James, go ahead and go into your user record. So click on your name and then scroll down, and there's a default account department right under organization. And that will pull up the list of existing accounts departments that you've built, right? So it's only going to be that small list currently. And you could start typing whichever one was one appropriate for you. But you can click on it here too, and it'll populate. So are you application services? Is that a group you're in?
Enterprise.
Enterprise? Okay, click on that. So now that's your account. That's your defaulted account department. You hit the green save button. What's going to happen is any time you create a project request or create a ticket, it will auto default to the your account department. You can always change it. So if you end up creating a ticket for somebody else, you can put in the requester's account department, or it would default to the requester's account department. On the project request side, I'll also mention that if you have a sponsor of the request, it will default to the sponsor's user record account department.
Just a general question. So for the project management, if you have a external user, let's say that's outside of the organization, let's say like a consultant, do you have to add them in here as a user, bring them into the project?
You do. You would need them to have at a minimum a client license, and
Client. Okay.
yeah. So it's a free license, which is good. The caveat there is that they would need to be set up as a user in this tool, which
Okay.
here's where the kicker is that if you guys are leveraging single sign-on and that is turned on for everybody, that external user would need to be set up in your organization as a user and given your internal credentials to be able and have their own quote. They would need to look like an Imperial Valley College user, and they
So
would have to be set up in your single sign-on
so they would need to
environment.
be part of the single sign-on.
Correct. Exactly
Oh,
right. While we're here, underneath the default account department is a request priority. That is typically used for VIP people, right? So like your CIO, your CTO, your president, maybe, your executive folks, you can auto set their priority such that anytime they were to specifically request a ticket, or if they were to be the sponsor of a project, it would auto populate the priority on that request or on that ticket to whatever priority you set here. Again, that's a pretty rare one, but I just wanted to show you since we're right here anyway. Again, it might be for like a president, CIO, CTO, VP level. You could set their priority for anything that comes in to have high or maybe emergency priority on it. For James here, let's go ahead and hit the green save button, and we have his account department set. How many accounts departments do you foresee having? Are we talking a couple of dozen where you think you could do this manually? Or are we talking into the hundreds where an import might be better leveraged?
No, I think manually, but
yeah. So I would start off manually doing it.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation, because
Yeah.
the import's helpful, but it's a little bit convoluted, and you have to leverage some web services. So
Yeah.
I would say what we just did here is kind of a mini version of what you guys need to do from a homework perspective then, is to think of the accounts departments that you have using these user records here. What are all of the accounts departments that you need to populate on their defaulted account department on their user record? And that will get you started, and that will probably get you, another several accounts departments, and then appropriately apply them to the users. And then you need to pull out probably an org structure for your Imperial College and look at that, and then just continue to build out those other accounts departments. Probably not getting too granular. I'd probably say one parent level is about as deep as you want to go. I mean, you certainly could go deeper than that if you needed to. But from a reporting perspective, I think the sweet spot is a parent level for sure, obviously, and then maybe one sub level beneath that. Excellent. So create the accounts departments. Remember, if you need a parent, you got to create the parent first, and then apply the account department to the appropriate users that you currently have. And then also note and communicate this with Omar, is that once you have that account department list fully created, then there is a column in that people import that matches to that, and that column has to be populated with the exact words you guys are using. So for a new person coming in that needs their default account department to be information technology, via that import, the column on Omar's spreadsheet does need to say information technology. It can't say like info tech or office of information tech. It's got to match exactly to the letter. So that's accounts departments. The next one we're going to talk about is locations. And locations, think of that as just buildings, right? Just buildings. And we will that's leveraged primarily on the ticketing side, but it's a good one to look at now that we're thinking about it. So what are buildings, right? We're talking maybe it's a main hall, administrative hall, an athletics facility, a dorm, your dorms, if you need those things. And much like accounts departments, they can easily be manually created, right? Later on, we're going to use them to potentially populate the rooms. And if somebody is a go-getter and wants to do a room import, you can do that. So let's show you how to do that real quick. Most of the building that we're doing is taking place inside TD admin. What we're going to do right now is actually taking place inside your Asset CI's application here. So if you back out of users and roles, and then go down to applications, we need to leverage the locations and rooms are going to be built in your Assets CI's application. If we click on here, this will show us what's been currently built, which is nothing in here, right? So we're inside TD admin, but where we need to build this is actually in the Asset CI's portion of the TD Next part of the tool. Probably don't remember how to get back there, and that's okay. I'm going to show you. It's real quick and easy. Let's back out of applications. Let's click on your name, Imperial Valley College, Community College there in the upper left. On your main page below your red logo on that page in here, it says the TD Next URL. Click on that, and that'll open up a new browser for you, and you actually already had it pulled up.
Yeah, probably.
But that's how you can get from TD. That's how you can get from TD admin to TD Next. When you're in one application interface, you can get to another. In here, let's go to the application menu, which is the blue waffle underneath the word Imperial there. Yep. And then when you're in TD Next, if you click on that TD admin, it'll take you back to TD admin. You don't have to do that right now, but you can always toggle between one app, one interface to another. But where we want to go is the Asset CI's tile or application in here. That's next to analysis there. Yep. So in the left navigation, we'll see that there are locations. That is going to show you any existing locations that you've built out. So let's build out a couple. And the way that we do that is we go up to the plus new button. And location is the first one here. So again, this is how we could do it manually. And this could be, what building do you guys typically work in?
903.
This would just be building your buildings, right? Or creating your buildings here under location. So you want to build out all of your locations. And then if you want to do a room import, right? So that you now have 903 IT as a building, but then we have all the rooms associated with 903 IT. You can go to the blue import button that's up there between configuration item and reports. And you can go down to the location room import. Now you could do a location import, but it's pretty quick to do the manual building load unless you have, over 100 buildings on your campus.
So like 900 would be like the base
Yep.
room. Okay.
Yep. So click on the location room import. This will walk you through how to do that. The download template is down here. If you click on it, let's pull up this spreadsheet and show you what's currently built so far for you. So if you go to the location column and then you click on the cell right below that, it should already have a drop down for you. Right below that, go to the F2 cell.
There you go. Got it.
We might have to refresh, but it typically would populate. That's where you'd want to populate 903 IT. So let's say you have 100 rooms in 903 IT, then in column A2 down to A100, you would populate the actual name. You do need an external ID, which can be any sort of digit that's appropriate to that. But column F is all going to be 903 IT from F2 down to F100. And then you would do that for the next building, right? 904. And you would do all the rooms for 904, and then you do 905, and then all the rooms for 905, so on and so forth. So this spreadsheet can get rather large because each building has, multiple rooms. But once you have this spreadsheet built, then you would just go back to that, go ahead and X out of this spreadsheet here, and you would just do this upload. First of all, we'd want to make sure we do it in the sandbox first, and the sandbox, we'd want to double check the data and make sure that it's looking good, and then come back and rinse and repeat here in production. And then your locations and would have rooms associated with them. This is out of all the pieces of homework that you have today, this is the least important, because location and location rooms are not going to come into play until we do tickets down the road. So if somebody has free time and they want to do this now, certainly have at it, but it's not a priority, so to speak.
If I understand correctly, it's a two-step process. We have to create the main location, right? And then we come in here and create all the sub-locations using this template, and then we need to run it through the sandbox before we go live with it, I guess, whatever.
Yeah, you want to import it in sandbox just so you take a look at the data and make sure that the everything's tracking appropriately, the data looks correct. Do a spot check of that, which it usually does. And then from there, you're going to take that same spreadsheet, unless you have any edits on it, and do the same process here in production. And then your location rooms are all loaded and ready for you later on from a ticketing perspective. Your imperial.teamdynamics.com/sandbox. And let's take a quick look at it while we got you here, just because it should be set up every once in a while. The setup of it may not be done, and I want to make sure it's there for you. So if you go into one of your other browsers here, and then just type in teamdynamics.com/sandbox. So let's go ahead and try to log in here from an administrator's perspective and see if it's got you in here set up. Yep, I think there's a couple buttons on our end we need to there's a couple buttons on our end we need to turn on. So I'll follow up with you today on that. All right, you can X out of here for now, and then I'll just give you the high sign on when you guys are all set up in your sandbox and ready to go.
Okay.
Your sandbox environment is there, that's for sure. It's just a matter of making sure you guys are in there. All right, let's go back to TD admin. And let's go back to organization settings. And let's go down to briefcase attachment integration. In the project side, this doesn't have anything to do with tickets, but in the projects side of the house, on your projects, there is a component called a briefcase that you can store documents in. And many organizations have Google Drive files, Box files, Dropbox, OneDrive for Business, and they want to integrate that so they can leave the documents there and link them. So do you guys leverage any of these? And if so, which ones? And I can take a piece of homework from that and make sure that things have been turned on from an integration perspective. OneDrive, Business for sure. And then you said Google as well, Google Drive?
Yeah.
Okay. I will get those turned on for you. That's my piece of homework. Next up in the left navigation, let's go down to days off. So this is where you're going to want to build out your company-wide holidays. So let's go up to the green plus new button. And most likely the next one up is July 4th, but it falls on like a Friday. I'm sorry, a Saturday. So potentially your company paid holiday. So let's just do that one for now. So click on that. And then if it's a one-day holiday, we're just going to want to do the same date. So July 3rd to July 3rd. And then in the name, you can put, 4th of July or Independence Day, holiday, whatever you want to call it. And then save that. And then you'd want to do the same for the next typical holiday coming up would be Labor Day, which I believe is September, what would that date be? And the reason we're doing this isn't just for an exercise to put holidays on there, but it is on the project side of the house, it is negating out those days from that month that day off is in to show appropriate capacity for resources, right? So for the month of July, it's going to show essentially every Friday, or not that every Friday. So there's the 3rd, 10th, 17th, 24th, and 31st. So it's going to subtract out those 5 days and show from a hourly capacity that project resources have less time in July than they potentially would in like August or June, because you guys don't have 5 days off in that month. So this is probably the easiest piece of homework, but it's to pull out your company holidays and as far into the future that you can go, put those in here, right? If you can go for sure through the end of 2020, but if you can go into 2021, because you'll have to manually do this every year. And if you have your calendar schedule out through 2021, I would push it all the way out as you can. For multiple days off, like winter break, obviously just put the first day of break and the last day of break, right? So oftentimes in December, winter break is like maybe July 24th through, like this year, it's probably July 23rd or 4th through January 1st, right? Because that falls on a Friday, and then people are potentially back to work on Monday the 4th. So you'd put in the 23rd through the 23rd of December through the 1st of January. We're going to now see how the rubber meets the road on this, right? So let's go back to, let's back out of organization settings. Let's go down to users and roles and go to users. And then James, pull up your user record. So scroll down to the bottom here, and on every user record, there is a daily capacity. So the daily capacity is typically 8 hours, right? People typically work an 8-hour day. So on your users, and this is not for client license users. This is typically for technician licenses and above. Anybody who's going to be looked at from a resource capacity and availability perspective. So normally on everybody's user record, it's set for 8 hours, right? There's a rare occasions where it's maybe set for something less than that. When I worked at Madison College, we were a union shop, and our union daily capacity was 7.75, 7 3/4 hours. I've seen 7.5. I've seen 7, but pretty standard to be 8 hours. This user's capacity is managed. We want that checked. Leave that as is. This user is an employee. We want that checked. We'll leave that as is. This user should report time. That is if you're going to use the Team Dynamix tool as a 40-hour per week time reporting, and you're going to submit time in that fashion. Extremely rare that anybody does that. I've had about 40 implementations I've worked on in 3.5 years, and I've had one customer that is using Team Dynamix as their de facto time tracking from a 40-hour work week. So that somebody has to fill out on a time card, I've worked, 8 hours on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So if that box is checked there, all of your users are going to be getting an email notification saying, fill out your time card, fill out your time card. Chances are you want to deselect that on people's user records. Additionally, a couple of other things to look at here is from an hourly bill rate and an hourly cost rate. Again, that can be leveraged. It is relatively rare in higher ed that people are tracking those costs, but you can. I've seen it more often in the private sector. But the hourly bill rate is what you would charge out to another department. So like sometimes in a organization, maybe dedicating a lot of your time towards work for another department, and then you bill them out. Again, pretty rare in higher ed, but the hourly bill rate would be that amount that you, for this particular user. The hourly cost rate is typically their fully loaded cost of that employee on an hourly basis. So typically the bill rate would be higher than the cost rate, right? Maybe the hourly cost rate is $40, but when you bill it out, it's going to be $50 or whatever it might be. Very rare that either of those are used, but it's there for the taking should you guys need it.
Actually, it might come in kind of handy because we do, well, I don't know if it'd be a project, but we do services on the weekends for other organizations coming and borrows our facilities that we support. So I could see a use.
Okay. The capacity dates are if this user is potentially like a limited term employee, right? Or if they only work a certain part of the year, maybe they're have a 6-month contract, and the capacity date would be that 6 months that they would have there. Again, that's pretty rare, but it can be leveraged. And then below that is reports to and resource pool. So the reports to is the manager typically of this person, right? Who do they report directly into? And where this might be leveraged is on a resource pool, right? So we don't have any resource pools set up yet. So the reports to is the direct manager. And if you were to select that this user should report time, and you had your staff recording that 40-hour a week work, and then they submitted their time card, that time card would get sent to the person in this reports to field. So right now it's auto defaulting to James, right? But let's say that, and I don't think this is the case, but let's say that James reported into Jeff. If Jeff was in this reports to field and James was required to fill out a time card and submit it every week, then Jeff would get that and approve that time card. That's really about all it is leveraged for from the capacity perspective. However, it is also leveraged on the ticketing side for a relationship, right? So on the ticketing side, there are workflows and different roles out there, and we'll see that when we talk about tickets, that would relate to, okay, a requester has submitted something and it needs an approval, and it needs their manager's approval. Well, this is where they would grab that manager from. So if James submitted a request for a new purchase of a laptop, but he needed his manager's approval, and you guys have a workflow set up that his manager needs to approve it, then the tool would see that Jeff is James' manager and send the approval to Jeff, and then Jeff would say, yep, I approve that he can purchase this one. So that relationship, the reports to, would be the user's manager in that perspective. All righty. So looking at the capacity here, we have the daily capacity, 8 hours, which is typically defaulted. You should be set there for your user records. What you probably want to do is, if you're not going to leverage the tool as a 40-hour-a-week time tracking, is to deselect the user should report time on anybody that's has a technician license or above for your users here. Reports to is going to be leveraged as typically the direct manager for that user, and then obviously the individuals need to be a user in the tool, both the reports to person and the user record here. And that's going to be leveraged primarily on the ticket side. On the project side, the resource pool can be leveraged from an oversight perspective. So two topics we're going to talk about now are functional roles and resource pools. So functional roles are usually the types of roles that are needed on a project request as it's going through that phase 1, phase 2 approach that we talked about, right? Phase 1 is the project request intake process, and potentially, and we'll talk about this as we're designing things, potentially you could allow your project requesters, when they're filling out their project request form and subsequent business case, you could, again, I'll use that word potentially, allow them to start selecting functional roles that they believe are needed on this project. What do functional roles look like? Typically, project manager, business analyst, DBA, network engineer, system admin, so on and so forth. So typically the type of roles that are in an IT department that need to be leveraged on a typical IT project. So we need to build out those functional roles. Like I said, potentially you could allow the requester in phase 1 to start selecting, hey, I think I need these types of roles. You don't have to let them do it. And many people don't, because they just don't know what resources are needed on projects. So you can turn that functionality off easily, but you could turn it back on in phase 2 when you're doing your project request review process, when you're reviewing all the data from the requester. And at that level, you could also start saying, now here I know we need for this type of a project these type of functional roles. And you can look at the functional roles from a capacity and availability perspective, and the tool will show you data that, okay, we only have 2 business analysts if we need, and the 2 ones that we have right now might be over allocated or working on projects and they're not available, or hey, we have plenty of availability. So it helps you in prioritizing, looking at capacity and availability, and potentially selecting the person eventually that's going to be put on the project. So much like anything else in the tool, we need to define the functional roles first, put a name to what they are, and then we need to assign those functional roles to the users, right? Tie them together. So let's do that. And we'll circle back to this resource pool concept here in just a second. So let's go ahead and save what you did on your here. Yep. And in the left navigation, let's go up to functional roles. And let's create a couple here. So if I were to ask the 3 of you, what is your primary role? James, what would you say your role is, your title, or what you do?
That's a loaded question.
Multiple hats, I'm sure. And again, you actually, with that concept, you can have multiple functional roles on your user record, but you can designate one of them as a primary functional role, and that's usually the one you do the most often. So if you do 2 things Your primary is the one that you think you do 51% of the time. If you do 3 things, it's the one that you do the most out of those 3.
Still a loaded question.
Well, let's just build a couple of typical ones. So project manager is typically a functional role. I would call it manager, because this is like for what we would put on an individual.
Yeah, I get it.
Do we have a project manager?
I don't think we do. That's the thing.
No.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
one, Jeff. James
right.
is one. Whoever has a project's the project manager.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But we don't have a true.
All right,
project
you don't. Then you don't need that as a functional role then, because that can be associated to a project without this official title. So, Jonathan,
put
what
our
is
titles?
Sure. And I often tell people, think of it not simply from your specific title, but is your title, do multiple people do your title? Because from a capacity and availability perspective, that's what we're looking for. People that do that type of work to see if they have availability to be put on projects. So James,
so
what's
you're
your
like,
title? Let's see if that.
Oh, so I get it. So like you want, like James and Jeff are both directors, so you want the title to be director, and then that'll do the resource availability for directors total, right?
That's the concept.
Okay.
But it's also looking at it from, think of the functional role, especially on a project, as the subject matter expert and the person that's going to be doing that task work on the project. So does the concept you're talking about, director, putting it on Jeff and Jonathan, is spot on, but is the director doing any sort of work on a project? That might not quite match exactly what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
Okay. I get
Okay.
what you're saying.
Kind of more of a coordinator, actually. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah. We could have like enterprise project manager. That could be you, James, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's better, Jeff. We separate it by the departments.
Yeah.
well, I think we can come back and have a discussion. We can change it anyway.
Yeah, once you get the general naming convention, then it's gonna kind of fall in line.
Yeah.
So let's do that. Let's create. Who was that talking, Jeff?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So let's do that. Let's create DBA.
How much you want to charge an hour, Jeff?
You don't have to put. Yeah, you can put dollar amounts in there, but typically it just needs a digit. So I'd put, maybe 0 for both of these, just so you have something in there.
Just put 0.
Yeah, our time's always free.
All right, let's go ahead and save that one, and then let's do another one. And financial aid analyst, is that what you had said?
Yep.
You could probably just, there you go, yeah.
Can we just modify this? Yeah.
Yep. Now you can do financial aid analyst, and then save that one. Oh, I'm sorry. We changed the existing one. So X out of here, and then go to the plus new to create a new one.
Too bad.
All right. Let's do DBA and then 00. All right. So we got 2 functional roles in. Let's go back into the left navigation to the users. And let's click on Jeff's name. And then in the left navigation on his user record, let's go to functional roles. And then let's add both of those here. And hit the green add button after each time. Now, that participant is just a defaulted role. To clean it up, I like to actually just remove it. But to remove it, you need to make one of the other 2 his primary. for now, just make one of them his primary. Yeah, the database
Yeah,
one.
just put,
Select that
yeah,
checkbox right there.
yeah, there you go.
And then hit the save button on that one in the edit column.
Got it.
And then remove participant just to clean it up.
Cool.
So Jeff's now has 2 functional roles that would be available to, if you were to select one of these types of roles on a project request. Once that project has been, once that request has been approved, you staff it with people that are in these roles. So Jeff's name would come up as a potential person that's a DBA or a financial aid analyst to be put on a project. So functional roles are not integrated with or tied to resource pools, but they can look very similar. So my guess, Jeff, is that you're not the only database administrator. And my guess could be wrong, but I would assume there are probably others that have a database administrator role as well.
Nope.
Nope.
Okay, my guess
I'm
is wrong. All right, let's go to in the left nav. Let's go ahead and X out of this small window here, and let's go over to the left navigation down to resource pools. We'll talk about resource pools for a little bit. So resource pools are usually a group of people that do the same type of work and report into the same typical manager. And this is primarily from a project perspective, right? So when I was at Madison College, I don't want to make Jeff jealous, but we did have a DBA group, and there were 4 people in there. So we created a DBA resource pool and put those 4 resources into it, and then we put their manager as the resource pool manager. And then the manager could provide oversight or be notified when those resources were requested to be put on projects. So let's create a new resource pool here. And just show you some of the functionality of it. So I'm just going to create a fake one here. Call it the PMO. Let's pretend we have a bunch of PMOs, a bunch of project managers. And then the primary manager would be the PMO director, right? Which we don't have somebody in that role right now. But let's just say it was Jeff. Right, and then if we made this active, then we could just make it. Let's go ahead and make it active right now. And then the oversight comes in 2 ways here. The heavy oversight, or the heavy-handed oversight, is the requires approval. So I'm going to use James and Jonathan as an example. Let's say on James and Jonathan's user record that, let's just pretend you guys are full-time PM project managers and you report into Jeff. On your user record, that one field we saw that we had blank was called resource pool. If we put the PMO resource pool in there, it is then saying that the resource pool manager, Jeff, this checkbox here requires approval, means that anytime James or Jonathan would get asked to or requested to be put on a project, before they got put on that project, Jeff would have to provide an approval. So I'm the project manager, or I'm creating a new project and I want James on it, and I go to select James and go to start scheduling him out. Before he actually gets put on my project, there's an approval process. Jeff would get pinged with an email notification from Team Dynamix, and he'd have to approve that. Now, it might take a minute, it might take a half hour, it might take a couple days if Jeff's out. So that's a heavy-handed oversight that is probably used, I would say, 20% of the time that box is checked. The notify on assignment is simply just pinging Jeff with an email that James and Jonathan have been added to a project, just so that he's notified. That is almost always selected. So depending on what type of resource pool oversight, it's probably, I would probably say don't do the requires approval, because when you're building out your projects and adding resources, you got to wait to get approval on it. And most likely during that review process, you've already talked to the resource pool manager. They already know who's going to be on it based on availability and schedule. And so that layer of oversight is typically not needed. But there are organizations that are very structured and they want, nope, I want this manager to approve them before they ever go on any project. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Alrighty. So just as an example, let's go ahead and hit the add button. We can come out here and delete this resource pool, change it, because obviously Jeff might not be on here. But so we can see that now on our pool, we have, it requires approval. Nope, that's good. Notify on assignment on the PMO one. Yep, again. So anybody who is listed as being in the PMO resource pool, Jeff would get notified that they are being put on projects down the road. So oftentimes, and what I was saying earlier was that the functional role, while the functional role and the resource pools aren't tied together or integrated, oftentimes the name of functional roles can be very similar to the name of a resource pool, right? So we had one of Jeff's functional roles was a DBA. As I mentioned, DBA might be indeed the name of this resource pool. And if you have more than one DBA, then those DBAs would report into the manager for that department. So if this level of oversight is really not needed, you guys might not need to create these resource pools and not need to set up either the require approval or notify on assignment. It can be leveraged and used from a reporting perspective, obviously, and an oversight perspective. It is not a mandatory field or requirement. So this is a little bit of homework to, again, I'll send you information about resource pools from our KB article so you can review it later on. If you're a flat organization, you only have, like one or two people, then maybe resource pools don't need to be leveraged. So it's just something to consider. I just wanted to let you know what resource pools are.
Hey, Mark, so that functionality, notify on assignment, is that only available within the resource pool? Or is that available elsewhere within the system?
There are other notifications throughout the tool as well on the ticketing side.
But on the project side?
On the project side, correct, that this is the only place that would be leveraged. Now, when you're being added to a project specifically, the specific resources can get notified. So James and Jonathan, if I'm a manager and I'm adding Jonathan, there's a checkbox that could say notify Jonathan that he's being added to this project. He could get notified to it.
Oh, okay.
But the manager part of it, the manager part of it, that's what this notify on assignment would do, is that if Jonathan and James were part of this PMO resource pool, anytime they are added to a project, you, Jeff, would be getting an email saying one of your resources, Jonathan, has been added to a project.
Okay, got you. All right.
I see value in this, so, or at least, yeah, because you are using that resource, and that resource would be like, say Jeff, one of your guys, they're tied up. We've talked about this where, we're doing financial aid projects, and now our president wants to work on this other project. Well, your resources are tied up, so how do you want to spread out those resources? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's right, James.
While we're talking about these things, there's a couple of other items on here, similar but different. Go up to the groups. Now this is more, so resource pools are specific to projects, right? Groups are typically more specific to the ticketing application. So we'll circle back to this topic again on the ticketing side, but it can also be leveraged, groups can be leveraged in two different ways in the tool. One way is to allow permissions to either see things in the tool or not see things in the tool. For example, out at the client portal level, for your service catalog in your knowledge base area, if there are certain groups that you want to see certain services or knowledge base articles, you can set permissions that only those groups can see those services or see those articles, right? You can, and that's typically called whitelisting. We're whitelisting those services for these groups. Or you could do the opposite of that. You could blacklist those groups so they cannot see those services, right? So you could create many different kinds of groups so that they can be leveraged from a permissioning perspective. For example, you could create an IT group and put all of your IT folks in there so that if there are knowledge base articles that are specific only to IT people, then only the IT people can see it. And conversely, from a blacklisting, one of the examples would be there might be an HR knowledge base article that's out there for faculty and staff, and you don't want students to see that, so you could create an all ginormous group for your students and then blacklist them from seeing that knowledge base article that was specific only to HR for faculty and staff. So that's groups, setting them up and designing them specifically for permissioning to be able to see certain things in the tool, typically at the client portal. The other way that groups are leveraged are specifically on the ticketing side of the application, so that you can make certain groups responsible for certain types of tickets. So group responsibility, help desk group responsible for these types of tickets, DBA group responsible for these types of tickets, engineers responsible for these types of tickets, so on and so forth. So we don't have to create any groups right now, but it's just a thought to start thinking about down the road from a ticketing perspective, where groups are leveraged and how we can do it from a permissioning perspective for services and knowledge base items out at the client portal, whitelisting and blacklisting, and then for tickets, so that you can make certain people responsible, certain groups responsible for certain types of tickets. So right now, I would create just a general help desk group. That's usually pretty standard. Let's go ahead and just name this one help desk group. and then hit the save button.
What's the external ID? What would that be used for?
That's just usually sometimes an HR coding that you guys might have that you want to leverage here. It's not a mandatory field, but it just allows you to leverage that. All right, then click on the name help desk group now. And once you have your technicians from a help desk perspective all in, you can start adding people in there. I don't know if the existing users that you have would, and you could do it in a big bang, right? So you could select a bunch all at once and put them in this group. All right, we're gonna spend the last 20 minutes or so getting some things set up for project request intake, right? So some of the things that we've set up already, accounts departments help with that, days off, resource pools, functional roles, that sort of thing. We want to talk about our last two topics that we want to talk about today are time types and project types. So let's back out of users and roles. And let's go down to time and expense. And let's go to time types. And we're going to create a couple standard ones here. This first one, let's call project time. And again, I don't know why we make this code mandatory, but any digit can be leveraged in there. And that's, again, just a potentially some sort of an HR code that you guys might use on the back end on the HR side. But for now, let's put a 0 in for that field. The GL account is also an accounting code, general ledger account. And then we have several different options here. We certainly want to keep this one active. You could potentially make it billable so that you could bill out this time to other departments. You could mark it if it's capitalized, which would differentiate it from an operational budget. Usually there's two types of budgets, your capital budget and your operational budget. Most of the time it's not going to be capitalized. Limited and time off, I'll talk about that in a moment. But for now, we're pretty good here. So let's go ahead and hit the green save. Let's go back up to the create one more new one, plus new. And let's call this one ticket time. And then again, probably just use 0 and then active. And again, go ahead and hit the green save. Now, if down the road you guys do want to leverage the Team Dynamix tool for time tracking, vacation time, that sort of thing, then you would additionally create multiple time off time types, right? So for example, you could have PTO, right? Paid time off. Other examples would be like floating holidays, right? We all have our, 10 typical holidays that everybody gets, but then some organizations will give you like 1 or 2 floating holidays a year, sabbatical days. So you could make those as time off time types, right? Other types of time off time types are things like sick leave, jury leave, all of the HR type codes that are out there. That would be things like bereavement leave, and anything that you'd want to leverage from a time off. Again, most of the time, if you're not leveraging the tool as a time card perspective, you probably don't need to build out time off time types. But if you did, you would want it to be active, you'd want to give it a code, and then you'd want to select the time off type checkbox there. And that would differentiate it from your project time and your ticket time. Let's go to the plus new button, and let's call this workspace time. And then give it a 0 code and hit the green save button. So we'll talk about workspace time when we probably at the start of our next call. A workspace is a place to capture time that you do typical administrative items. Like, it's not specific project work. It most likely is not specific ticket time work. It is things like professional development, meetings that aren't related to a project or tickets work. It might be general support, operational support, keep the lights on activities, more meetings, all of the things that are captured, right? So that if you were to start looking at a weekly time card, you could see that I have, 20 hours of project time, and I have 10 hours of ticket time, and I have 5 hours of workspace administrative time that I'm doing. We'll circle back to that when we create some workspaces and talk about how that workspace concept is leveraged in the tool from an availability and capacity perspective. If we have time today, we might even talk about it a little bit further. But the three typical time types we have are the project time, ticket time, and workspace time. And again, down the road, you could leverage your time off time types if you wanted to start tracking time off down the road. But the time types are important both on the project and ticketing side. And we tie these two time types of project and ticket time and workspace time onto specific project types and specific ticket types so that you can track time on those items. So this is just another one of those building blocks that we need to create. So we created the three time types we for sure need. And now we're going to go over, we're going to back out of time and let me just pause. Any questions on the time types? All right, so let's back out of time and expense. And let's go down to project types are found in either portfolio planning or project. So either one, wherever you create, it'll populate in both areas. So go ahead and click on the project workspaces here. And let's go down to types. Those are the project types. And let's create a couple project types here. So let's go to the plus new button. And the category here is most likely general. So let's grab that one for now. And you could change that and add categories if you need to. Again, categories is another reportable element. Yep, that's where you would add more categories should you need them. But the name here, let's call this one a general project type. I know it's kind of redundant, general category, general project type.
Yeah.
The evaluator could be somebody who looks at any project request that comes in under this type and potentially guides it along in its process. More often than not, though, like 99.9% of the time, a project is going to automatically be flowing through the tool based on automation rules that we create. So this evaluator doesn't necessarily need to do anything. They can get notified of the new project or request that they're an evaluator on, and that's probably the biggest thing that they might be leveraged for. And you can search and report on the evaluator field in the tool as well. So it used to play a prominent role 7-8 years ago before we had some automation rules in place where the evaluator would play as traffic cop. But now it's more of just a named field here. So you don't need an evaluator in here, but if you do, you probably want to have them notified when any project or request is coming in. For now, you can just save it and you can circle back and add an evaluator here if you feel that's needed. So the key thing here is to go to the project time type tab and add that project time that we selected. Click on project time and hit the green add button. And this is what allows anybody to report time on a general project type because it now has a project time type. Let's go back to the general tab and hit the green save button one more time just to be safe.
Say again, I'm sorry.
The general tab right above the green add button.
Save.
Let's hit the save button just to be safe. Let's X out of here. And let's create two more. And if you hit the blue refresh button, we'll see that it's showing up here.
Oh, got it.
Let's create two more. Let's create a software project type. So just, yeah, software project. Let's grab that general category right above that. Let's hit the save button and then let's add the project time type. And that's really the key, is adding this project time to this project type Otherwise, down the road, when somebody leverages this type of a project and somebody is working on it, they have a spot to record time. If we didn't put the time type on there, then those folks wouldn't be able to put time on it. Let's go back to General tab, hit Save. X out of here. And let's do one more and call it a hardware project. Hit the Save button, add the time type. There we go. Good. So now we have 3 project types. Each of them have a time type associated with it, or the project time type associated with it. And we're relatively set here. We will do the same thing down the road on the tickets. Tickets need a ticket type, and it also needs a time type attached to the ticket type. So we'll eventually be doing the same thing down there. But your homework from a project type perspective is to take a look at your existing list of projects, and do they fall into a project type that you want to build out here, right? Because this is good from a reporting perspective, right? And then just from an overall understanding of the types of projects that you do. So I'll send you a Getting Started with Project Types KV article that will have a list of some other examples of project types. But this kind of gives you an example: hardware, software, solutions, facilities project, so on and so forth. So you could have, I've seen, in some organizations, maybe there's only several project types, and I've seen as many as, dozens of project types. On the ticket side, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of ticket types out there, because there's so many granular levels of types of tickets that you could potentially have. Projects certainly not quite as many, but I've seen, probably in the 5, 10 range or so. So your homework for that is to, again, look at your existing list of projects, and do they naturally fall into a project type that you could build out here? If so, just build this type list out, add 3, 4, 5 more, however many make sense for your guys' needs. And then don't forget, when you're creating these, to, after you initially save it, go back to that time type and add your project time type on there, and then you're set.